Gradable and ungradable adjectives. Well, if you look at a scale from the smallest, such as a negative, to the largest, such as the positive, the ungradable adjectives represent the limits of the scale at each end. And the gradable adjectives are those points that are in the middle of the scale because they are able to be slightly different from each other. Well, let's look at this example of gradable and ungradable adjectives. From looking at freezing to boiling, well, those two are the ungradable adjectives because they represent the limits of the scale. Freezing is freezing and boiling is boiling, and there's really not much of a difference in that, and you can't really make it more freezing or more boiling. But yet cold, warm, and hot are each gradable adjectives that represent those points in the scale, because there's varying degrees of cold. Cold that's almost warm, warm that's in the middle, but it's getting closer to hot, hot that's like so close that it's almost boiling, but it's not boiling yet. So we can look at how these gradable adjectives can be slightly different from each other, and there's degrees of cold. Very cold, slightly cold, a little cold. So these are examples of gradable and ungradable adjectives. And continuing to look at gradable and ungradable adjectives, now let's look at what is big, as such as small and large. The ungradable adjectives in this degree, which represent those limits of the scale, would be minute, and it looks like the word minute, but it's minute. That is so small, and yet it's the smallest of the small. And so therefore, minute is that limit, the smallest limit. And vast, that is so large that it's that other limit of the scale. So each at the each ends of that scale. But small and large are those gradable adjectives, those points in the middle. That small and large can be so close that it's actually like a medium. Small, is it tiny, itty bitty, or is it large, is it humongous? Gradable and ungradable adjectives. Gradable and ungradable adjectives, looking at the price of things. The ungradable adjectives that represent those limits of the scale could be something that's free. You don't have to pay anything. It's free. To something that's priceless. It is so expensive that it doesn't even have a price on it. Now, the limits within the scale, those points in the middle of the outside limits, those points in the middle, those gradable adjectives, could be between cheap, it costs a little bit of money and it's not of good quality, to expensive, to something that costs a lot of money and it is a much more better quality. So therefore we can look at how cheap is it? How expensive is it? Can cheap things become expensive? Can expensive things be sold cheap for less money? Gradable and ungradable adjectives.